I am Brian Mays. Follow along on our adventures chasing all kinds of game in the heartland of America. Our passions run from the North Woods rivers all the way out to the wild and wide open prairies. We are untamed, and wild is all we chase. This is the Amazing Outdoors Podcast.
Oh, that's a ski, dude. That's a moss ski.
There's one around the tree right there.
Oh, there goes another one. That's a good way to start the morning. I'm gonna drink some of my beer quick.
All right, ladies and gents, on today's episode of the Amazing Outdoors Podcast, we have a cowboy out of Texas who does fly fishing mostly. JD Roberts is our guest today. A couple quick reminders. I'm going to be out at Pheasant Fest this upcoming weekend in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, hanging out at the Wisconsin Sharp-Tailed Grouse Society booth. Come out, say hi. I got some show discounted dates available for October to come up and rough grouse hunt with me. So if you're in the market, make sure you swing on by the Wisconsin Sharp-Tailed Grouse Society booth. Also, a note from our podcast sponsor, HW Launchers. It's getting to be spring training season. If you're in the market for a bird launcher at an affordable cost, head on over to Facebook, search HW Launchers, and tell Jeremiah you heard about his pigeon launchers on the Amazing Outdoors Podcast. I'm going to hit the roll button, keep it nice, short, and sweet. Hope to see some folks out at Pheasant Fest this upcoming weekend. And here is today's episode. JD Roberts, owner of Finstincts, who does kind of fly fishing mostly down in the big state of Texas. He's got some interesting stories, and I'm happy to have him on the podcast. All right, folks, I got an interesting gentleman from the heart of Texas on the podcast today. JD Roberts, owner of Finstincts. How you doing, man? I appreciate you making some time for me today.
Man, I'm doing great, Brian. Appreciate you guys having me.
Awesome, man. Well, why don't you give the listeners a little bit of insight into kind of what you all do and kind of your history is to getting into the outfitting space and kind of where you exactly are. Lay the landscape for the listeners.
Right. So I'll kind of start with where we're at today. Like right now, I'm living in Grayford, Texas. It's an hour west of the DFW. I'm 32 years old. I'm running a fly fishing outfit. We float our home river here, the Brazos River, in rafts that are set up like drift boats with fishing frames, and we run a half dozen of those, 5 days a week, and that's our bread and butter. And then we have some other cool adventures and some fishing camps down on the border. We do some international stuff. As far as how I got here, man, I really didn't ever see myself being where I'm at today. All I ever wanted to be was a cowboy, man. Since I was a little kid, I grew up around horses and in the cowboy world and rodeoing. And my dad was a hunter and a fisherman and was really good to expose me to all of it, frequently at a young age. And I think the first time I went fly fishing I was 7 or 8 years old on the San Juan River. And still to this day, probably haven't caught a rainbow trout as big as I did my first day. But I fell in love with the fishing at a young age, and my dad, he likes it. He loves to hunt. And he always was good to expose me to the fly fishing a couple times a year. And it wasn't until I was in college, fast forward to 2011, I was going to school in West Texas, Amarillo, and had some friends that were going to school there that were from New Mexico, from Taos, Raton, northern New Mexico, and I started going up there and fishing with them a lot. And I probably had, 100 days in my life under my belt time I was 19. So we got ate up with it in college, spent a lot of time skiing, fishing, so much so that I quit the rodeo team my junior year, sold all my horses, and went to British Columbia on a study abroad. mostly to fish for bull trout in the Kootenai Valley. And that's kind of where I latched onto it, started owning it myself and thinking, hey, maybe I could do this forever. And so I ended up taking a year and a half off college right there, spent a fall in BC, went back to Montana, lived with a couple of guys that were independent contractors and guides. One of them was an outfitter, and they just kind of vouched for me. And I had previously gotten my guide's license in Montana. So let me back up. My first guide job I ever had was for a horse packing outfitter. The horses have kind of opened the door into everything I've wanted to do. So I show up, cowboy kid from Texas that knows nothing about fly fishing, got 100 days under my belt, and they need a cowboy, and they're like, "You're hired." And I said, "Hey, get me my guide's license." And I don't know if you know this about Montana, but their kind of requirement to get a guide's license is to be endorsed by an outfitter.
Now, I didn't really know that, but I know it's a lot more difficult, and even, the outfitter space with the permits and everything else, it's pretty restrictive.
Right. And so they kind of make their own criteria for being endorsed by an outfitter, but a lot of times the path is going to guide school, going to, Sweetwater or Sweetgrass or over in Livingston, Hubbard's, some of those big prestigious guide schools, and then you get hired on by an outfitter. And if you don't take that route, maybe you're the shop kid for a couple of years and you're washing boats and selling flies, and then you go to guide school. And well, I showed up and got in with this old horse packing outfitter as a cowboy kid and was like, "Hey, sign off and get me my fishing guide's license." He was like, "Sure, that sounds great." And we're taking these people to the Hawks Rest, the Thoroughfare in Yellowstone, backcountry, Yellowstone cutthroats, super easy fishing, middle of summer, fishing big foam bugs. And so before I knew it, I was taking clients. And then I went to BC and then moved back to Montana, didn't go back to college, and lived with some guys that were fishing from a boat for a living. And they kind of just signed off for me and was like, "Hey, he's good. He's our buddy." I got my independent contractor's license, and I started going and working for some of these other outfitters with them. I think the very first time I ever rode a drift boat, I had clients in it. I had spent some time on a raft, but anyway, so I found myself guiding from a boat a little bit, and then I went back and finished college. I was already 3 years invested and fell in love with a girl that was from the same area I was. And when I finished school, we went and lived in a van for about a year and a half almost. Montana, Idaho, places I had previously sown seeds all over the West and knew people. And we traveled by way of the Horsefoot. So I rewind a little bit. Again, I grew up around the horses. My dad told me every good cowboy should be able to shoe a horse. When I was about 15, I got a set of horseshoeing tools for Christmas and tricked a lot of people into letting me shoe their horses for beer money through school. And it kept me from going hungry a lot of times. So we lived in a van for a year and a half, and we had all my horseshoeing tools rolled out the back on a cart on a winch, and we pulled a drift boat and a raft behind it. And we traveled and fished by way of the Horsefoot. Like, we'd stop in a ranch, make $1,200, go to Dollar General, fill up on groceries and hide for 2.5 weeks on the North Platte till we ran out of money, and then go find more horses to shoot. And all that time through that adventure, I was thinking I was going to kind of find where we wanted to settle down. And we were, we prospected around and talked about finding the next Jackson Hole or the next Aspen kind of thing, and never dreamed that I would end up settling down back here. The older I get, the more I realize I can be happy or miserable anywhere in the world, Brian.
Yeah.
I've had some of my lowest points, man, in some of the prettiest places in North America, And so we made a big tour in the van, and we ended up coming back to the west of the DFW area, about an hour, Weatherford, Mineral Wells, and settling down, buying a place. My wife had a good job here, and I was shoeing some horses, doing farrier work, and nothing will make you think about what you're going to do to make money like shoeing horses will, because it's hard work, man. Like, it'll make you think there's better ways to make a living, And
I can only imagine, man. Them critters, if they don't want to deal with you, they can put a hurting on you pretty quick.
Yeah. So we settled down back here, and before I knew it, I was covered up in horseshoeing, like working 6 days a week, and hadn't guided a trip since 2018, end of 17 maybe, and this was like 2020, and we still had boats, and we're floating and fishing our rivers here all the time, and sparked a lot of interest. I don't take credit for the idea of fishing from a raft, that's for sure. That's, a very old way of traveling and fishing rivers. But down here in Texas, dude, there was no rafts, no drift boats around till I showed up. And like every guide in Central and North Texas is fishing from a raft now. They were like, oh my gosh, we've never seen that. So It sparked a lot of interest. We were just getting out fishing on the weekends, and people were begging me to take some trips. And so I thought, you know what, I will guide a few trips, and started guiding a few trips in 21. I guess COVID was pretty rampant. People were staying home. People were getting outdoors. And I said, okay, well, I can make a little money doing this. Maybe my goal is to fish 2 days a week and not shoe so many horses. Well, halfway through the year, I had 3 boats and was fishing 4 or 5 days a week and having to hire other horseshoers to go and look after my clients, and, dude, we've just kind of, it's a snowball effect, like got a lot of momentum from there. We're running 6 boats all the time now. And we've been really fortunate to have a couple of clients that are like retreat centers that do 5 boat floats with us 3 times a month.
Nice.
Repeat clients that are worth $40,000-$50,000 a year. And so you start filling in the gaps with the word of mouth stuff around, and it's pretty easy to get covered up. We're fixing to start a guide school here this next summer.
Are you really?
So, yes, sir. Yeah. So I've figured the best guides I can get are the ones I can train. Finding guys that can fish is really easy. Finding people that are cool and a good representation of me and what I stand for is hard.
Oh yeah.
That's their parents' job when they're like 4 or 5 and teach them to be cool. So I just been finding these cool cowboy kids, buddies of mine with good, people skills, and they're fun to be around, and I can teach those guys to row and fish. And I've crash coursed a pile of them through my little guide school over here in Grayford, but we're gonna open it up to the public this summer. I have a friend that puts on fly fishing camps. Has been doing it for a dozen years, so he has a lot of good kids that have come through his camps, and we're going to kind of target some of them and see if we can get some of these 18, 20-year-old kids.
Hell, man, I'd even come down for something like that, to be honest with you. I've been guiding for a number of years now, but I've never been through a guide school. And it's something I thought about, as I kind of personally got a little bit out of the fishing space here and started, focusing on the bird hunting. There's only a couple places that offer, any kind of hunting per se guide school that I would be interested in. But regardless, I think kind of any guide school, it's more on, anybody can, you can teach anybody to fish and roll a boat. It's not that difficult. The people skills is, I think, where, just kind of being in that environment with other guides and see what they're doing. It's real valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's, the more you learn, the more there is to learn, like to reading clients and knowing when somebody needs instant gratification and they have, short attention span and a short range of to cast, and they can throw 25 feet and they want to catch a big fish, and how to make that happen and fish through them with the oars is a whole nother animal. You get these guys where they can row and like, oh yeah, I can row the boat, I can fish. Well, can you fish through this, old guy that can throw it 25 feet with his $2,500 setup and wants to catch a 10-pound bass? Can you make that happen? That's where it kind of sets them apart.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to it. If a guy wants to dig in and really learn and being around our deal, it'll be neat. They'll learn to saddle a horse and, throw the Wyoming hitch and pack a mule and, deflate a raft and crank it up out of a canyon on a crane and all kinds of stuff, man. Fly fishing and all things Western. So.
No, I love it, man. You got a very interesting story, and you're a young guy who's got a lot of ambition, and it's it was fun kind of connecting with you earlier this year and just hearing the snowball effect, because you can hear it in your voice. You can hear how kind of excited you are about, just the continued
I
growth.
hope so. Yeah, I hope so, man. The day that you can't, you won't. I'll be doing something else, So you got to be excited about it, because it's all hard work.
Well, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your home water, man. What you run your bread and butter on that, but you've got some other stuff too, and we're going to get there in a minute. But like, what's this home water, North Texas kind of fishery that you guys are doing from rafts? You're fly fishing, but like, what is this kind of river, and what kind of species you guys kind of target? Is I know nothing about this fishery, man. I'm very interested to learn.
Yeah, so we float and fish the Brazos River. We live right here. I'm just 3 to 5 miles from several different put-ins, and we're right below a big lake, real prestigious lake in Texas called Possum Kingdom Lake. They have Red Bull cliff diving there, and boat docks with helicopter pads, and it's a big ritzy kind of lake, and it's a real small town I live in. It's kind of a lake town. Gets busy during the summer months. But the Brazos River feeds this Possum Kingdom Lake. It starts in far west Texas, and it's a freestone river, for lack of a better term. There's not many stones. It's kind of a sandy bottom river. It comes into PK, and then we live right below it. So that tailwater, that's where they start calling it the Brazos. All the forks of it come together right above the lake there. And it's like the 8th longest river in the United States, I believe. It's just short of 900 miles to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a great big river basin that runs down the heart of Texas and picks up a lot of these other hill country rivers as it goes along. And where I live here, it's a bass fishery, man. There's parts of it between other lakes that have more of a striper run, or have less greenfish and more carp and gar. And we have all the warm water fish that you'll find in the south in this river, but it's an excellent largemouth bass fishery. And I grew up floating and fishing this river, tournament bass fishing, and just being exposed to the fly fishing a little bit. But after coming back from fishing out west and kind of adopting the western style of fishing from a drift boat or a raft and fly fishing, and to translate that to my home waters here, it was like, opening a big surprise Christmas present as a kid. I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that warm water fly fishing was so cool. And you don't have to go to Colorado to get tugged on and get spooled by a 5.5 foot gar. And other people around here are starting to pick that up too. So our river here, we have largemouth bass, smallmouth, spotted bass, striper, hybrid, sand bass. So there's lots of, predatory fish to throw bait fish flies at and stuff like that. But our day to day is throwing big bait fish patterns on 7 to 10 weight rods, lots of intermediate lines, and looking for big predatory reaction bites from these largemouth bass. And for 5 months of the year, we're throwing poppers with $half-dollar size faces. It's kind of a PG version of what you guys do for the toothy fish, I would say.
It's it sounds interesting as all hell. I've seen a little bit of it on YouTube, but so there, you said for 5 months out of the year, there's a topwater bite.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say you can catch them, looking up, in mid-April, but really when the water temperature gets close to 80, it's when it's really good. Like mid-June,
quote unquote, frog hatch
all the way
happens.
into October. Yes. Yeah, we're throwing lots of big frogs, like big, 7-8 inch looking bullfrog patterns and stuff like that. It's a blast. It's so much fun, and people that have only been exposed to, throwing size 18 elk hair caddis.
Oh, it's a big change.
They love it. They're like, oh my God, I can see my fly. I'm like, yeah, and you can hear it. Like, I like them to be so loud it makes everybody in the boat jump because they think it got blown up on. Bloom, bloom, So, yeah, it's cool. And the bass they're a really honest fish too. And it's pretty common to go out and catch 25 of them a piece, and for everybody to scratch up a big one or two. They're opportunistic scavengers. They're the apex predators of this river. But one big bass, he'll eat a crippled baby duck today, and his neighbor might eat a bullfrog and a baby rattlesnake, and the other one eats 2 gizzard shad and a crawfish, and tomorrow they'll all trade places.
Sure.
So, I tell people 90% of the battle, no matter whether you're bait fishing or fly fishing or whatever you're doing, is believing there's a fish there and believing they're going to eat what you're throwing. And when it comes down to fly selection, I would say 90% of the time, I feel like any fly in the box could catch that fish I'm trying to catch. It's all about finding something that you believe in, presenting it right. Whether it's a bait fish, strip it like it's a bait fish. If it's a frog, strip it like it's a frog. But if you put it in front of them and show it to them right, they're going to try it on most of the time, which is really cool.
Do you guys, how's the water clarity down there? Is there sight fishing opportunities, or is a lot of blind casting?
Yeah. A little bit of sight fishing on the Brazos, a lot of blind casting at structure and deep water, rocky banks.
Yeah.
The rocks tend to hold fish through the summer and through the winter. I mean, obviously in, the spring and the fall, you're catching a lot of fish along the banks, but I find that they move a little more in the spring and the fall. We'll catch them on the wood. The rocks in the wintertime are the warmest thing on the river. They soak up the sunlight all day, and so the fish kind of cling to them. And then in the summertime, generally where those big rocks are is where it's also deep. So there's shade and depth there.
Yep.
They move up and down in the water column, but they hang to those rocks through the hot months and the cold months, it seems like. So
what's the water speed like on a lot of that river, right? You said you're doing it in rafts, but you encounter many guys with jets or anything like that, or is it kind of a solely kind of float trip opportunity?
Yeah, good question. So there are some guys with jet boats. I've actually got an inboard stick steer Jet John.
Nice.
That's super sketchy. It runs about 48 and 3 inches of water. It idles at 6 miles an hour, no reverse. We don't take clients out on it, and you got to take a big toolbox when you go.
Oh yeah, they're gnarly boats from what I understand, those stick drive boats.
Yeah. So a lot of the time our river is low enough that you can run a jet boat in it, but you got to be pretty mad at it, not like it very much. So I only run my jet boat when they bump the flows. There's a few guys that have airboats, and we do some of that. We'll use airboats to shuttle our camps in, drop camps off, stuff like that. But it's primarily a float river, and people cuss it for being low and for having to drag boats certain times of the year. And I love it, man, because if it had any more water in it, it'd be covered in bass boats. That's what makes it such a special fishery. Is it takes a little bit of work. But nobody else floats and fishes it from rafts or drift boats. They've only tried it in a canoe where you can hardly stand up, and they see us out there. I got a 65-year-old man standing up, double hauling on the front of the boat, and they're like, "Oh wow, that looks cool," And so it's sparked a lot of interest. People are realizing that's the best way to fish this river is from a raft. So, and to answer your question about flow, I could tell you the CFS, but that looks so different in every riverbed. It's hard to translate that, but we don't have a lot of elevation change in our river up here. And so it is pretty slow. There'll be a hole that's anywhere from a half mile to a mile long. And we pull up to the boat ramp and people can't tell which way the river's flowing. It's flat water, and then it'll hit a ripple and get skinny and into another hole. That's how almost all of our Texas rivers are, I would say. Even the ones with white water on them, they have big flat holes in them, and then they'll lose a little elevation and pick up some speed and flatten back out.
So a lot of forward rowing.
A lot of forward rowing. A lot. Yeah. Yeah. I've actually put in with the wind against the current, and fished upstream before on several stretches of this river. That's something you don't do out west.
No. I've had those experiences where, you get halfway down a float and the wind picks up and it's coming up and going through a long flat stretch, and you just row and row and row, and you feel like you don't make any progress, maybe even a little negative progress, and then eventually you catch a break and a little current and you get out of there. But I have not done the opposite, which put it going upriver.
Sometimes down here when that happens, we just say screw it, and we go halfway down, we just ride the wind back to the truck, and then we go pick up our other vehicle at the takeout. So that's one of the trickier things. The shuttle stuff down here in Texas, it's not like out west where you leave a $20 bill in your visor and your truck's sitting at the takeout when you get there.
Yeah,
we do have to do all of our own shuttling, so there's a lot of work, like the night before, always going dropping off vehicles and stuff like that. But I wish somebody would start us a shuttle service.
Yeah, that's a tough business, man. There's up here, we don't have a lot of shuttles. We do have decent shuttle service in certain areas, and then we've got a couple good guys, but they're so localized in certain areas. A vast majority of what I would say the great water up this way doesn't have shuttles, and you got to kind of do it on your own, which it can be taxing. Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like there's never a way to simplify all that. It's always changing, makes your head hurt thinking about the best way to do all the logistics all the time. So
yeah, when I was running St. Croix trips, I had a shuttle service up there, and it was slick. I just meet the customers at the takeout. They drop their car, shuttle guy drops his car, and we all run up to the put in and dump the boat and see you later.
Yep.
Which was pretty slick, but yeah, if you don't have that, what kind of distances between are you guys doing on like a full day? So like, what's the shuttle look like for you guys?
A pretty hardy full day float is 7 or 8 miles down here on this flat water.
Yeah.
A lot of times. So I encourage people to book full day floats in the spring and the fall. That's almost all we do is full day floats, and then there's 3 months there, mid-June to mid-September, where it's too hot to be on the river after lunchtime. So we kind of just do half-day stuff during the summer. And then we fish the lake at night a lot in the summer. We fish green lights off the docks that hold bait fish. And
sure.
So we'll get out on the lake and fly fish under those green lights for striper and bass. And it's super cool, man. You can see your fly in the light and watch a big green fish come out from under the dock and, crush it. It's fun.
So that's kind of your bread and butter, where you spend, obviously you live there, but you also do some stuff down in South Texas along the border. There's a few fairly well-known rivers down there, but you've got some, and you don't even all just do fishing. You do some hunting stuff too. So let's talk a little bit about this South Texas scene that you're kind of tapped into. What's that like?
Yeah, so this is a kind of a new thing for us in the last year. I just started last spring with a ranch down on the lower Pecos River, and it's the second most remote river in the lower 48 states. And Brian, I have maxed out credit cards and blown up pickup trucks, like fishing every river in the American West, a bunch of them, dude, like 300 of them. And I have not been anywhere that makes me feel like this place does. It's wild. You don't have snow-capped peaks. You don't have big spruce trees. It's Chihuahuan desert. Like you drive across the ranch, and it's 2 hours after you leave the blacktop till you see the river, and you feel like you're on the outskirts of hell, dude. And there's 50 species of cactus and 3 kinds of rattlesnakes, and it's just a great big rock pile. To give you a little perspective, like this ranch is just shy of 50,000 acres, and he's got 70 cows on it. So there's not a lot of feed, dude. It's rock and it's cactus, and you're going across this ranch, and I always love seeing people's reaction in the truck. They're just kind of like, I can tell they're getting antsy, and they're like, "Where's this dude taking us?" And then you get this feeling the earth's going to fall off up here, and like you kind of can't see over the horizon. And then you get to the edge of that canyon, and you look upon a fishery that will take your breath away, dude. Like you can glass up bass in binoculars from 400 feet above the river. And you can see the bottom of it 20 feet deep, 25 feet deep. It's gin clear. And this Pecos River, it starts near Santa Fe, New Mexico in the mountains, and it's a trout fishery, and makes its way into central New Mexico, gets too warm for trout, gets kind of muddy and red, and down into Pecos, Texas, like oil field country, Midland, Odessa. And around Pecos, Texas, they raise shrimp and redfish in it. It's so salty. And then it completely goes into the ground, runs dry out there in the Trans-Pecos. It starts to pick up some springs again. And as you get down close to the border, it becomes rocky bottom and picks up springs. And by the time it gets to where we're fishing it, the last 20 miles of it, it averages 8 to 12 feet deep. A lot of it is, and it's all sight fishing, 100% sight fishing. A guy can almost catch more fish down there just standing on the front of the boat ready to cast than you can blind casting at the bank all day. It's a really, really special place, man. And to add to that is all the Indian art around. The more I go down there, the more the fishing just becomes a bonus. People ask, well, how's the fishing like? It's probably the best warm water bass fishing, fly fishing, sight fishing opportunity in the world. But you're surrounded by markers of civilization that are 1,200 to 4,000 years old. We have a wall tent camp down there that is right next to the largest petroglyph site in the southwest. So petroglyphs are carvings, pictographs are paintings. You may know that. I didn't until I started going down there, and I've started.
I guess I didn't really realize the actual distinction.
I've had to become kind of an Indian rock art tour guide down there, and so we camp right by this petroglyph site, and it's up on top of the rim, and you walk on it. It's flat rock. It's as big as 2 football fields, and it's covered from end to end in carvings a half inch deep in the rock. Like stick figures throwing spears, maps of the stars, like all kinds of wild stuff scratched on the rocks. And this ranch probably has 50 caves you could lose an F-350 truck in. And these caves, about half of them have paintings on the walls that are from the same time period, 1,400 to 4,000 year old paintings that are still on the walls, like a life-size red mountain lion.
Wow.
And to see stuff like that, man, it kind of puts everything in perspective. It's pretty cool. And then you have, the best sight fishing, bass fishing in the world right there in the midst of it. It just makes it a really, really special place. And being the second most remote river to the Smith, like it's remote, dude. You feel like you get scalped by the Indians and just scream your little heart out. Nobody would ever hear you. It's the kind of remote that makes you think about every decision you make as an outfitter or a guide, like from a safety standpoint. I've always been pretty John Wayne, fast and loose, shoot from the hip. But you get somewhere like that, and obviously we have satellite phones, but nobody wants to be the guy that pushes the red button, And so it makes you stop and think about everything and evaluate everything and try to make good decisions. It's cool being remote like that.
So the fishery down there, it being so remote, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. You're talking a 2-hour ride from Blacktop into some of these rivers. So, or this spot that you guys fish, that implies that there's not a lot of access. So can you kind of lay out, like,
yes,
what, you've got access to this ranch, and what does that translate to your customers and kind of the experience with dealing with other people? Because I think this Pecos gets fished in certain areas, but you're fishing an area that there's really no access, if from what we've been talking about. But can you kind of expand on that?
Yeah. So the lower, I would call it the lower Pecos, the floatable part of the Pecos, starts in Pandale, Texas. It's about 45 miles upriver from where we camp at. And that is the only public put in. And the only takeout is 20 miles below where we're at. It's about a 67-mile float, public to public. And so, I mean, you know what that time commitment looks like. There's people that do it in the kayak, and they torture themselves, and they paddle 15 miles a day, and they don't fish very hard. But I would say less than a couple hundred people a year do that float. And I think the main reason for it is they just can't commit the time to it. I mean, I couldn't commit the time if it wasn't how I made a living, right? To be down there for a week and a half at a time. And so what we offer is the ability for people to go and experience it, fish it, float it, a 17.5-mile stretch of it that happens to be the best section of it. So by the first public put in, it's kind of mountainous, flat top mountains. It's still desert, mind you, rocky mountains, but it might be flat on one side and have a mountain on the other. And as it carves its way down into the desert there, it becomes more and more canyon-like. And by the time you get to where we're camped, it's what they call the lower canyons. It's cut its way deep into the earth. I mean, it's 300-400 foot walls on either side. So this ranch, they have 17 miles of river, and there's one place you can drive a truck down to it. And the rest of it, like the put in and the takeout, is really tricky, dude. We take our rafts out on a crane, and we put them in on a crane in some places. We've built these cranes and installed them on the cliffs down there. and they run on a hand crank with gears. There's probably some dudes somewhere putting in RS rafts in over a cliff with a crane, but I haven't met them, man. I keep thinking we're going to get a better endorsement deal one of these days.
So with this remoteness, you typically, you're not doing day trips down there. You mentioned a camp already. So yeah, what's that look like
and
for
to answer
somebody?
Your question about
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just as far as seeing people too. So I have probably spent 30 days guiding on the river now, and I've seen 2 guys in canoes one night. They came past our camp, and I had it in my mind that when I saw a paddler out there, it was going to be like a ceremonial type deal, like, hey, come to our camp, have a steak. You're obviously badass too. You're doing the whole Pecos, and kind of some camaraderie. And these guys, I said, y'all want to eat with us? And they said, no, we're in a hurry. And they had a great big rapid below them. And I know what it's like going through that rapid. I thought, oh my God, they're going to do this in the dark and try to get portage these boats around this waterfall and stuff. And they said, we like shit shows in the dark. I'm like, good, that's what y'all got coming. Holler if you need help. they never stopped and saw us. But yeah, we don't see many people down there. I mean, because the amount of people that can commit that time to it are just so few and far between,
I was just kind of scoping it out on satellite, kind of roughly where you told me it was. And man, it looks like it's like pool, like it looks like it has some decent elevation change in like it'll run flat and then it'll drop a couple feet and then run flat and drop a couple feet. Some of these little chutes in here, man, look tiny.
It does. It's tricky. There's places where the river will lose 10 feet of elevation in a span of 40 yards. Like you're coming up on the rapid and you can hear it and you can see the next section of river down below. And it's like skiing over something blind. You're like, what's this one going to be like? And you get up there and it's whitewater, serious whitewater, but it's low technical whitewater. And so there's a lot of places our rafts don't fit through there. We have to pick them up and carry them around it. But there's definitely places we've gotten rafts wedged on a boulder down there and be taking water over the side. And you're like, oh my God, I'm going to sink a boat on this tiny little Texas river. Yeah, it's cool. The rapids are more than you would expect to find anywhere in the Southwest.
Yeah, it actually, I'm looking at a couple spots on here and it's like, that's a nice little chute. Looks technical, and it looks like some
very
boulder
technical
gardens in it.
Yes, yeah, very technical.
How much water comes into the Pecos down there from other sources, or is it mostly just spring fed?
It is mostly spring fed. So all of that country is just solid rock. And when it rains, it can rain an inch and that river might come up 3 feet in an hour, because every drop of water within 100 miles around runs down into that river bottom. But there are not feeder creeks per se. All of the water that we're fishing down there at normal constant flows is coming up out of the ground.
So is that water fairly cool in comparison to?
It is.
Like, I know the Rio Grande's not far from there. Is there a lot of
much cooler than the Rio Grande? Yes. The Rio Grande is fed by a lot of tributaries, and it's muddy, and gets really warm during the summer. Like our home river here, we are on a tailwater section of the Brazos, and it comes out of the bottom of a deep lake, but it gets warm during the summer too. The Pecos coming up out of the ground, like it can be 106 down there, and the river will be, in the mid 70s, low 70s, through the dog days of summer. And then in the wintertime too, it's also, warmer coming up out of the ground, being that constant temperature. The Devil's River, you may have heard of, it runs parallel to the Pecos, about 30 miles apart, and they flow into the same lake that's on the border, Lake Amistad. And the Devil's River is spring fed also. It's a little bit colder water, and that makes the Devil's a world-class smallmouth fishery.
And that's what I've heard of the Devils, yeah.
Yes. The Pecos does not have smallmouth. Doesn't mean you won't catch one. They're very few and far between. Just like on our home river here, we catch, 200 largemouth to every smallmouth. It's just right in the top of their temperature range. It's just a little bit warmer than they like,
Yeah.
Not so hot they can't survive, but they don't thrive in it.
So you also run trips on the Devils?
Actually, I do. I'm just starting this spring with a friend of mine that runs a fly fishing outfit down here called Fatty's on the Fly. We're co-hosting some trips down there together, and my very first trip to run on the Devils as a guided trip will be this April. So,
nice.
Yeah, we are going to start doing some of that. I have a personal lease on a ranch on the Devils where it comes out of the ground right at the very beginning of it, 20,000 gallons a minute. You look up the riverbed and it's dry, and where you put in, it's completely full, and it looks like the Bass Pro Aquarium, and it's a super, super special place. I take friends and family down there, but they're not interested in doing any outfitting. So we're going to do a public to public float, actually a private to public. We're going to put in a little above where everyone else does, but we're going to do a 4-day, 4-night float on the river on the Devils. Different than our Pecos trips, we have a wall tent base camp, and we fish different stretches of it each day. I have had trips where people wanted to stay on the river, and we do longer stretches, and I kind of custom tailor them to people's ability and interest and stamina and the outdoors and the remote stuff down there. But the majority of our trips are hubbed out of a wall tent camp with all the comforts of home and some you wish you had,
Yeah. Yeah. And do you guys have that wall tent camp on the river?
Yes. Yeah, that's right down there on the Pecos. It's up on top of the rim, so we take a little short hike down to our boats in the river, and you can drive around to it right there. But we camp up on the rim, looking down at the river, right next to the petroglyph site. It's really cool, dude. It's like being in a planetarium at night. You count a shooting star every 3 seconds until you fall asleep.
Yeah, it's got to be. I mean, there's nothing down there, so the sky's got to be really big.
Oh yeah. You climb up on a windmill and you still can't see a light. It's cool.
What when you do run those trips, are you running kind of multiple boats? Is that typically how those deals run?
Right. So the majority of the time, I try to keep my groups between 4 and 8 people.
Yeah.
We do a lot of four clients, and I jokingly say a good guide to client ratio on the Pecos is 2 guides to 1 client, just because the put-ins and takeouts and portage and boats and all that can be so tough.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where I was going. You were talking about portage and boats, and I'm like, oh, you can't be doing this yourself with clients. So,
right. Yeah, so we say two guides to one client is good down there. But if I have a group of 4, it's usually 3 guides with us. I like to take rafts, and so obviously, a guide to row each raft, maybe a cook also, depending on the group and how big it is. But it's tough country. It makes for a lot of work, but it's worth every bit of it, man. It's really special. Nothing that special comes without a price.
No, it doesn't. It definitely doesn't. And yeah, you got any interesting stories? You were kind of telling me one the other day, and I'm like, yeah, save it for the podcast, man. That seemed.
Man, it's a long one. So it's a Pecos River story. This is it's kind of about the trials and tribulations of putting in and taking out, and the logistics of floating a river like that. I jokingly tell some of my guides, I say, and by remote, I mean the hardest river in North America to put a raft in. And so we went down there and looked at it. The first time I went to the ranch, we drove around with the guy, the rancher, and we went to about 7 different places that overlook the river in his Can-Am, and every one of them I looked at, and I mean, just take your breath away. It's beautiful, and you can see fish, and I'm like, okay, so where do we put a boat in right here? And I don't know any way to say it other than tough country makes tough people, but he would just be like, oh yeah, right, you trot down that hill over there, and you put it in there, and it's like a half mile down there. There's cliffs and all kinds of sketchy shit, and so after looking at all those and then seeing the one place you could drive to, the place you can drive a truck to the river happens to be at the start of their 17.5 miles. And so it didn't take me long to decide where we were going to put in at least, and we came back for a scouting trip. I took my dad with me. My old man, he's so cool. He's like 69 going on 19. He's a gamer, down for whatever. And, done lots of hard stuff in his life. He's not the most fit guy, but his mental game is so strong, he can handle about anything. And so we go down there on the maiden voyage, my dad and I, and we decided we were going to drive the truck down to the river at Lewis Canyon, the start of this 17 miles of a gorge section for people that are listening. Kind of to paint a picture, it's, you're floating down the river and you're looking at walls on both sides, and occasionally there's a side canyon that comes in. You can kind of look up the side canyon, and there's a lot of places that you or I could crawl out of there, but not to get a boat out, right? So we had driven around with this guy and scouted all these spots, and we knew that there was one place that they host a rock climbing festival twice a year. A ranch that size with no cattle, like agritourism is what pays their bills. So they have the American Alpine Society comes out and has a big rock climbing festival twice a year. And they have my fishing deal, and they have some hunting, and that's what pays for the ranch. And so the rock climbers had put in a crane a long time ago, and it looks like something you built in 6th grade shop. It's built out of 2 7/8 drill stem, terrible welds, and it's got a hand crank spool on it with no gears. It free spins both ways. It's just a spool with a handle and 500 foot of black diamond rock climbing rope. And we knew that this existed. We hadn't really looked at the feasibility of using it or if it was operable, but we knew it existed. And we decided we were going to put in on the river and see how far we could float in 2 days. And I had that card to play with the crane. I was like, okay, I know when we get to the crane, we could think about taking out there. And the ranch it's shaped like a cowboy boot for people that are listening. And the toe of the boot is facing west. And so the start of our access was at the boot top on the west side. And we looked at our Onyx and we studied it. We thought we're going to float all the way around this boot to the other top and then have a short walk across the boot top. If that makes sense. About 2 miles across there back to the truck. And that was in a perfect world. So after 2 days of encountering all these rapids and floating this stuff blind and carrying the boat around them and piles and piles of fun and the best fishing we've ever had, we've used all of our time now, and we're 3:00 in the afternoon on the second day, and I can see the crane coming up. And I'm looking at my Onyx, and we knew we were getting in deep when we had only made it 3 miles the first day of the 17. So I'm looking at my Onyx, and we've floated now down the west side of the boot, out around the end of the toe, and we're like halfway between the toe and heel on the bottom of the foot. So it's a much greater distance back to the truck than it is across the top of the boot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can see the crane. And I'm like, all right, Dad, I think this is it. I think we need to start trying to get out here and go see if we can use this crane. And, you know, we're away from the truck. I said, but I'll handle it. Like, it's all good. You stay here. I'll walk back to the truck. So my dad, he's studying his Onyx, and he's drawing lines, and he tells me it's going to be about 7 miles to the truck. I'm like, yeah, I can handle that. You know, no problem. Just a skip for a skipper. So we start getting our gear out, and we're looking at this cliff with the crane, but there's 2 10-foot ledges between us and the cliff. It's about a 10-foot ledge off the water, 20 yards, flat walking, another 10-foot ledge, another 20 yards, and then a 90-foot cliff with a crane on it. And then at the top of the cliff there where the crane is, we haven't really scouted it yet. We get up there and we start looking. And it's about a 200-yard walk up to where the road stops. And I would equate this walk to like stadium stairs with cactus. So we start getting our gear out, Brian, and you know, we didn't really pack light. It was an exploratory float. Like, I think we had rifles and saddle scabbards, you know, lever action 30-30s and bedrolls and cook box and all kinds of stuff, and spear gun, and, you know, snorkeling gear and fly fishing stuff. And so we load our gear out. It takes us about 2 hours to get it up to the crane, up this 10-foot ledge, up the next one. We get all our gear to the crane. We crank it all up on top of the cliff, and it's hot. It's mid-September. It's like 105 or 6 degrees. I mean, I'm just ripping sweat, you know, soaking wet. And we get our gear on top of the cliff, and it's like 5:30. Sun's starting to get a little low. It's starting to cool off, and I had already thought through all this. I'm like, all right, I'm going to walk back in the dark. It's going to be nice and cool. And, you know, about 5:30, I told my dad, I said, hey, I think I need to make tracks pretty soon. And so I put my tennis shoes on, put a dry shirt on. We never stopped and ate lunch that day. We didn't eat dinner because we were packing out. I had a couple protein bars left. We'd punched all our fun tickets on the river. I'm running on fumes, you know. And I pour a couple liquid IVs in my water bottle, go back down to the river and chug it and refill it, filter it. We're already out of our water. And so I got a couple water bottles in my backpack and a couple protein bars and satellite phone and my pistol with some rat shot and my phone and my Onyx. Thank God for Onyx, you know. And so I'm following these lines. I take off walking. It's like 6 o'clock, and it doesn't take long before it's totally dark. And you look at the weather when you go down there to that country. I talked about the drainage and it raining an inch and the river coming up 3 feet. So you're always looking at the weather, wanting to see no chance of rain in the forecast, right? So there was no chance of rain the whole time we're there. And it gets dark, and I like see a flash out on the horizon. I'm like, I know I'm tired, but I'm not hallucinating. I'm like, that's lightning. And more of it. And then this big lightning show proceeds to, you know, happen right in front of me, and it starts raining. And I get up on a hill, I get a little service and pull my weather up, and there's a massive thunderhead going across like 30 miles upriver from us. Well, my truck is parked on the same level as the water, like right on the water. Trailer tires are 3 feet from the river. And now I've got this daunting feeling of like, okay, I'm going to get back and my truck's going to be gone, right? In 2018, they had a 100-year flood there, and that river came up 33 feet in 3 hours.
Damn.
And their fishermen, they had some catfishing guys that were camping down there on the river. This ranch lost 3 pickup trucks. They woke up in the middle of the night, and by the time it was coming up, all they had time to do was crawl up out of there. And they got their trucks out of the river bottom with like a sky crane FEMA helicopter. So I'm thinking this is going to be me now. I'm like, oh God, I'm going to get back here. My truck's going to be crunched like a tin can in the bottom of some catfish hole, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm following these lines we drew on Onyx, and you can double click and, you know, see which direction you're facing. So I'm taking no wasted steps. And we had decided that I was going to leave the road and cut across this side canyon. It's hard to tell the story without you looking at the map, but we're on this big boot that's facing west, right? And so the roads, there are several side canyons that come into the main river bottom there, and all the roads go way out and around the heads of these canyons because it costs a ton of money to build a road down through them and up the other side, you know. So we had decided I was going to leave the road and make a straight line towards the truck and cross this one canyon called Shackleford Canyon.
I'm looking at it on the map right now because I got curious. That don't look easy, dude.
Okay, so I'm gonna stay on the left side of the boot there. I'm gonna kind of parallel the river, and I'm gonna cross the mouth of Shackleford Canyon. And I'd seen it one time before in the day, but now it's dark and it's raining, and I've got a headlamp on. And sometimes you make bad decisions with a headlamp because all you can see is what's within the scope of that light.
Yeah,
you know, and then you don't realize there's a 2-track road 50 yards to your left, and you're jumping off cliffs, you know. And so I get to the mouth of the canyon there, and I think I'm going to go right off the hog's back, like right at the mouth of it. I'm going to go down the spine of this ridge, thinking it's going to be the, you know, least cliffy. And I start off there in the dark, and I'm constantly stopping and looking around, like, is it a little better over here? And like, nope, just right in front of me, one bite at a time. And so I start off here, and it's a 6-foot bluff, and then a rock slide, and 8-foot bluff, and a rock slide, 6 foot, 10 foot, just like that. And I'm jumping down off these cliffs, and it's covered in cactus, dude. I mean, like thick cactus. And I'm not even able to worry about it or care about it. Like, I'm wearing cactus thorns from my elbows to my ankles, you know, all over my legs. Got cholla stuck to me. It's pouring rain now. And I'm kind of, you know, not panicking. I've been in situations like this, but I'm thinking about my truck getting washed away and trying to hoof it every chance I get. So I'm piling down off the side of this hill, and I kind of get to the bottom of this side canyon in the ravine there, and I hit the willows. So there's willows along the river, and then there's cane. There's lots of thick cane along the river. And some places it's a foot thick along the bank, and some places it's 10 feet thick along the bank. And when I say thick, I mean you can't see a flashlight through the other side of it. It's like a sheet. So I get through all these willows, and I hit this cane. And I've like given up my fear of snakes. Like, I'm covered in cactus. I'm entered now, dude. I'm just trying to get to the water. I'm tired of being in this brush and coming off the hill. And so I start pushing into this cane. There's not a trail for a worm to go through this shit, dude. Like, it's touching each other from the ground up, 10 feet tall. And I start just leaning into it like a football player pushes a sled. And it starts to kind of break forward and push forward. And then I see it breaks through like this sheet does. And I can see the water out in front of me. And the cane, it's almost like a diving board. I'm scooting out on it. I got a whole bunch of it between my legs. And I'm thinking I'm going to hit the water, and I'm going to be there. I'm going to stand there knee deep and catch my breath and pick some of this cactus out of me and look at my Onyx again. But just in case the water's not knee deep, I'm going to take my backpack off and hold it over my head. It's got my satellite phone, cell phone, pistol, all the stuff in it. And I'm going to take my cowboy hat off and hold it over my head. On my other hand, it's got my headlamp, just in case this water's deep. And I get scooted out on the end of the cane where it finally breaks and gives, and my feet hit the water, and I'll be damned if it's not 7.5 feet deep. You know, I'm about 6'3", so like it's 8-10 inches over my head. And so I got my arms extended, cowboy hat on one hand with a headlamp on it, and my backpack in the other hand. And I jump up and gasp and kind of get a breath, and I can see straight across this slough from me. And mind you, I said I wanted to come off this hill at the mouth of the canyon. I thought I was going to hit the Pecos River right where it joins this side slough. Well, I made it off there within the scope of my headlamp, and I was about 150 yards in the side canyon in the slough. So I'm 150 yards from the river bottom. And the slough, the water's about 30 feet across, and it's a cane wall on the other side too. So I jump up and I can see the other side. I gasp for some air, and I'm thinking now, I'm like, okay, I'm going to find a rock. I'm going to find a log, something I can stand on. The terrain's going to change in the bottom of this thing. And I jump up and I gasp again. I see the other side, and I start making my way. I take 2 or 3 steps underwater, and nothing. Still 7.5 feet silt. Jump up, gasp again. I make it all the way to the other side, and this whole son of a bitch is 7.5 feet deep in silt bottom, and nothing to stand on, nothing to grab. I can't hold anything because I have a headlamp and a hat on one hand and a backpack in the other. I can't even grab the cane and hold myself out of the water long enough to get my breath. And I kind of freaked out for just a second, dude. I like flailed around and jumped up and kind of spun a couple times. And I had this quick little come to Jesus thought in my head. It lasted like 2 seconds. I was like, okay, you can get your shit together right here, or you can drown, dude, in 7.5 feet of water. Like Bear Grylls would shit himself. What are you going to do? And so I jump up, I get another breath, and I get oriented. And I'm like, okay, I'm facing the river now. I'm in this slough, and I have a system. And I'm going to take 3 steps underwater, and I'm going to jump up and get a breath, and another 3 steps, jump up and get a breath. And so I start at it, dude, my little system. 3 steps, get a breath, 3 steps. And it seemed like it was an hour. I'm sure it was 4.5 minutes I did this. But about halfway through, I get a Charlie horse, dude. Like my hamstring is cramping. And I'm like flailing underwater. I'm like jumping up for a breath, and I'm like, don't die on this mountain, cowboy. Like, we're not going to die because we had a Charlie horse out here, And somehow by miraculous act of God or something, that cramp goes away, and I make it to the river bottom. But that entire slough was 7.5 feet deep in silty bottom, and right where it hit the river, I found the rock, and all of a sudden I jump up. It's 3 feet deep.
No shit.
And I'm standing there up to my pockets, and no shit. And all that while too, like while I was treading water in my headlamp, and I jump up and I could just see real quick, there was like giant gar and gizzard shad just 3 feet from my chest, just all around me. And I'm not scared of that stuff. I thought it was kind of cool, but I was in there running into these gar, in the dark, and felt a few of them bump me and stuff. But, some people might have freaked out right there and drowned. And so I get to the river, and I'm like, can't believe I didn't drown. I'm kind of catching my breath. I'm hunched over, hands on my knees, got my hat back on. I'm just kind of trying to see where I'm at, and get oriented again, and just grateful that I'm standing knee deep in the water on solid ground. And I look around, and I swear in my mind, I thought that Shackleford Canyon was one rapid below my truck. So I told you it's a long pool and a rapid, long pool and a rapid. So I thought, I'm going to go off this canyon, and I'm going to go wade up through this rapid, and then I'm going to walk along the bank back to my truck. That particular hole that my truck was on had a flat rock bank, no cane. And I'm hunched over, huffing and puffing, and I get up and I look around, and mind you, I've only seen all this once. I've only floated through it one time. And I have a big oh shit moment. I'm 2 rapids below my truck, 2 holes and 2 rapids. I'm thinking I'm a mile away. I'm like 3 miles away still. And I'm pissed about coming down the mountain. It was scary coming off the cliffs, almost drowning and all this. I'm like, I'll be damned if I'm not going to walk up the river to my truck. Even if I have to wade pockets deep, I'm going to find a way to stay in the river bottom. I'm not going back up that hill. And so I go through this rapid. I start walking up the next hole, and it doesn't take me long to find the ledge, and it's all 10 feet deep, bank to bank. There's no keeping my stuff dry. If I hadn't had my satellite phone, I might have swam, but I had to keep my stuff dry. So now I realize I have to go back up the mountain. There's no way to go up the river. It's cane. It's hard to paint a picture for you of what the sides look like, but it's in a canyon. So the banks, there's not much of them. It might be 10 yards of bank before you hit the cliff, and everything that's in the bottom other than water is thick willows and cane and cactus. The big middle finger, like you don't even think about walking through it. So I realized I'm going to have to go back up this mountain and get on a road. And at this point, I'm mad. I'm mad about the cane, breaking through it. I'm mad about, the cactus and all this stuff. And so I bust through the stuff like John Wayne. I crash through the cane. I climb up the rock piles, and I'm on the opposite side of Shackleford Canyon, coming up the other mouth. I'm going to get back on top. And I claw my way up through these rock slides and cactus until I get to the rim. And in that particular spot, it was about 40 foot of cliff at the top. And again, I can only see what's in the scope of my headlamp. It's still pouring rain, lightning crashing down, thunder cracking off, like wild weather. Still thinking my truck's about to float past me on the river at any second. And so I get up to this cliff, dude, and only seeing what's in the scope of my light, I realize I'm going to have to climb this thing. Like I'm about to play Alex Honnold right here. And I'm not a rock climber. I'm not scared of heights, but I'm not a rock climber. And can't go to the right, can't go to the left. Don't want to go back down. And I look up in front of me, and it's about 40 feet, and it's 1.5 feet inverted at the top. It hangs out. And I've been in these kind of situations like with a buddy before, or it wasn't like that, dude. It was like me and the elements, and that's it. Nobody to call. No, what do you think about this? How sketchy is this? If I fall off here, I'm like, the buzzards find me before anybody else does. Like,
right.
And so I look at this cliff, and I've never done this in the woods, man. Like I got on a knee, and I was like, dear God, I want to see my wife, and I want to see my little girl again. That's all I'm asking for. I don't need anything else. And I pulled my hat down, dude. And there's a crack in this cliff about 1 foot wide all the way to the top. And so I put my right leg and my right shoulder in it, and I start clawing my way up, finding footholds, finger holds, toe holds with my left hand, left foot. And I'm trying to stay as close as I can to the rocks. I don't know shit about rock climbing, but I got to stay close. So I got my chest up against it. My cowboy hat's like hitting the cliff, my light on. And I get all the way up to the top, and then I reach this inverted part. And I have to reach out behind me a little bit and grab the rim with both hands and get out of this crack, and have to let my feet hang for just a second and pull myself up on this thing. And it's still pouring rain, dude. And I kicked loose with my feet and shoved myself up on top of there and kissed the ground. I'd never been so happy to be on solid ground, other than when I came down the mountain and almost drowned in the slough 30 minutes before, And so I got on top, and I was like, enough of this river shit. I was like, I'm walking back to the truck on the roads. If it's there, it's there. It's gone. It's gone. And I'm looking at my Onyx all this time through this trek. And I told you that my dad, he told me, he said, it's about 7 miles, maybe 8. I'm already at like 9.6, dude, when I climb back up out of this thing. And so I double click it, and I can see which direction I'm facing. And I walk to the nearest road, and I get on the road, and I stay on it all the way back to my truck. And it ended up being 13.8 miles to the truck. And the water had just come up. It was just like touching the tread on my tires. The river had only come up about 3 inches. And I hopped in my truck, and I scrounged around for a few groceries that were under the seats, beef jerky sticks and stuff, ate everything I could find, and chugged a couple of seltzer waters like it was the best thing I'd ever had. And I drove back around the ranch to where my dad is. So these roads that go way out and around, it's a 2-hour drive from where my truck was back to my old man. I left him at 6 o'clock, and I got to my truck at about 12:50. And I got back over there at about 2:50 in the morning. And my dad was on the ground snoring in his bedroll. I drove right up on him like I was going to run him over, like I wanted to honk horn. And I was a little bit scared and like pissed that he wasn't worried about me, And
yeah.
he's raised me and put me in situations like this, and like how to handle this kind of stuff. And we always have like an unspoken code of like, tomorrow at noon. Like if I don't see you by tomorrow at noon, we'll get worried. And you always meet back where you saw each other last, And if you shoot your rifle off 3 times in the air real fast, maybe you need help. But we've kind of got those unspoken codes. And so I like jump out of my truck. He's still not awake. He's snoring. I like shake him. I'm like, hey, it's 2:50. I just got back, you know. And he's like, okay, so he's like, I wasn't gonna be worried about you till noon tomorrow. Like, never mind, Dad. I like crawled in the back of my truck and went to sleep, you know. But didn't even bother telling him I'd almost died a couple times. And then I texted the rancher, so he's a big lion hunter, and I texted him at one point that night at about 11 o'clock, and I said, just came out of Shackleford Canyon or something, walking back to Lewis. And I just wanted him to know where I was. And the next day when I saw him, he said, damn, he said, you walked from Emerald Pools to Lewis? You crossed Shackleford Canyon in the dark? And I think it earned me a lot of respect with those people down there. You know, he said, oh, at least I know I don't have to worry about you out here. And we just weren't going to call for a rescue our first time down there, you know.
Oh,
but
yeah.
if I had known what I was getting into, I might have called for a rescue right off the bat, dude. It was pretty funny. I try not to put myself in those situations, you know, but I do seem to find them with the lifestyle we live. And, it's the kind of stuff that makes you who you are. You're like, damn, a lesser man might have died right there, you know?
For sure, dude. I mean, that's a crazy ass story. What made you want to freaking go back after that?
Well, you know, we went down there and planned on floating one direction and doing some things we'd never do again, and that's one of them. And now we do a 2-day float from Lewis Canyon to the Crane, and then we take our stuff out on the Crane, and we have a vehicle shuttled around there. But I had driven around and I'd seen it from the top, and I'm like, man, you got to see it from the river too, you know?
Oh yeah.
So we just had to get down in there and figure it out. But we're still figuring out some things down there. We tried to float another stretch the other day and take the boats out on a side canyon with no crane and carry them up out of there. And I won't get into the story, but we went and scouted it out the night before with a belly full of beer and nothing on our backs. And we were like, oh yeah, we got this. Chest all puffed out. And dude, when we got to it from the bottom at the river, I was like, no, this can't be it. This can't be the spot, you know. And it took us 6 hours to carry a raft and an inflatable kayak up out of there. But it's tough country, and finding access to it other than doing that 67-mile float is where it gets tricky. We need to. Our next plan is to build us a little ski lift type pulley system down there with a cable, you know, and be able to cart stuff up the hill like that.
Yeah. Something,
it's cool, man. But
I mean, I was just looking at some pictures from that area, and you know, the listeners should, you know, can you kind of point them in a direction to maybe look at, like, I think the Rio Grande down by, or even like Lake, what is the name of the lake down there? You can kind of get a juxtaposition for what kind of the canyons that are in the area if you go look at pictures.
Right. Lake Amistad. And if you're looking at the map and you look at Lake Amistad, you follow it to the upper end, the northwest side, you see where the Rio Grande comes in. And you follow that up a little bit and you'll see the Pecos dumps into the Rio Grande. And if you follow that Pecos River up on the map there, not 10 miles, you'll see that big shape of a boot that points west. And that's where we fish right there. It's not far from the Rio Grande at all. In some places, people ask how far is Mexico? I'm like, well, it could be anywhere from 1.25 miles to 3.5, but it's not far.
Yeah, that one little stretch right there is, you know, not very far.
No. And people ask, well, what about, you know, do you see people walking across the border? And it's not until they get down there and they see that country, they get
rough.
it. They're like, oh, okay. This is why they spend their life savings and pay someone to guide them across there, so they don't end up here, you know?
Yeah, you're talking, you know, 25, 30 miles of Chihuahuan Desert in every direction before you get that one spot of water.
3 kinds of rattlesnakes. And when you do get to a spot of water, you got to, you know, scale a 300-foot cliff to get to it. And for people that are listening to be able to see some of this, going to our Instagram is a good way to see it. At Finstincts. So it's like, I tell people it's like instincts with an F on the front of it. You know, follow your Finstincts. that's kind of our sixth sense that you have as an angler. You either have it or you don't. You know, you can teach anybody how to cast, but the people that got the Finstincts are the ones that can hunt them up and make them bite, you know.
The sticks, the real.
That's it. Did you start getting a dorsal fin sprouting between your shoulder blades and you got the Finstincts?
No, you got a lot of good pictures on your Instagram about some of the fish you guys catch down there.
We did a cool video on it a while back that shows some good footage of it, and there's pictures and videos of us cranking the boats out on the crane and all that stuff. But it's a really wild place, and especially for people that have seen a lot of stuff in the American West and the Rockies, like that's definitely a bucket list place to go see.
I definitely want to come down.
Dude, and you would love it, Brian. There's more quail on that ranch. There's more blue quail than I've seen on any ranch in my life. And I did see a couple of Montezumas the other day.
No shit.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about this earlier in the year. We're going to have to, table this conversation from a podcast and maybe sit down and put a little idea on paper, because I definitely would love to get the hell out of here during the winter months and chase bird dogs in places that aren't as cold as Minnesota and Wisconsin.
It is not that. It's liable to be 90 degrees Christmas Day down there. So
that's a little too warm.
Right. It can be 10 degrees Christmas Day. It's desert climate, so it's unpredictable, right? But
yeah,
it's cold. It's cold at night and hot during the day most of the year. Even in the summertime, it gets pretty chilly at night.
Yeah, I remember when I was down in Arizona, man, and kind of the other end of the Chihuahua, and yeah, it gets real cold at night. But then boom, just like that, midday can be 60, 70, 80 degrees in the wintertime.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, we got to talk about that hunting stuff, man. It's just such different wild country down there. That's something that I'm not used to. I want to get down there and put my eyes on it, because I've hunted Arizona and I've hunted, some of New Mexico, but that particular country you're in looks a lot like some of the stuff I hunted in Arizona, but it doesn't look like. I don't know what the ground cover is. I don't know. It's one of those new places. You can only look at so much from an aerial photo,
Yeah, there's a lot of it that's like parts of Arizona, and there's places where you feel like you're in, Bryce Canyon National Park when you're down in the bottom. I tell people it's like Chihuahuan Desert and Arizona mountains, and then you get down in the bottom, it feels like you're in a Utah National Park, but you're floating the best freshwater, warm water fishery in the world. So it's a really dynamic combination of elements and ecosystems down there. It just makes it real special.
Well, we're going to have to make it happen, man. I'm going to have to start putting some plans together to get together down there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for, when people call me and inquire about it, man, I usually make them come fish the browsers with me at least a day first, unless I can bet them really good on the phone.
Oh yeah, if you got to take care of them for 2 days down there, man, you better know who you're taking with you.
Yeah, or longer. I tell them, I'm like, we need to make sure you think I'm worth shit as a fishing guide, and make sure you don't annoy me too much before we go to one of the most remote places in North America together and spend 4 days.
Yeah.
So, and everybody gets a physical fitness test and mostly a mental stability test. When you get people unplugged for 3 or 4 days and kind of battle the elements and have a few hardships, they start showing their true colors pretty quick, man.
Oh, absolutely.
And some people thrive on it, and those are the kind of people we try to take. Like they kind of pay for the struggle of being in such a remote place like that. And granted, we sleep good and we feed them really good. I mean, we're eating ribeyes with fried shrimp on top of them, and mashed potatoes and biscuits and gravy for breakfast, and we eat great, but there's some hard work during the day, picking boats up and clawing through some rapids and some of that. But people love that. It gives them a sense of empowerment. So
it sounds freaking awesome. And
it really is, dude. It's special. Yeah.
It's
but so is all this stuff down here, really all the warm water fishing, man. Like for anybody that's only been exposed to the trout fishing, like it opens up a whole new world. And you kind of, you guys up there have to cast fishing for those toothy critters and stuff, but a lot of the Rocky Mountain fly fishing stuff, and I cut my teeth fishing the Yellowstone River out of Livingston, Montana, and you're roll casting from a boat all day, and you're never casting more than 20 feet, and this is a little different. Like this is the next step, and then it's salt water, but you get into the warmer water fish, and when I say warm water fish, I would put your muskie and smallmouth and pike in that same class in my mind.
Oh yeah.
There's trout fish in freestone rivers, and then your other predatory freshwater fish. You're throwing bigger, heavier lines and having to cast a distance and learning to double haul. And I remember the first time I went to the Salt, I had 3 years of guiding under my belt out west, and thought I was God's gift to fly fishing. And my guy down there in Belize, he's like 65 feet, 11 o'clock, and I'm like, holy shit. 65 feet's a lot further than I thought it was, but this bass fishing, I was talking to a friend that's made a living for the last 20 years in Montana. Guiding the other day, he said, you probably have to teach people how to fish a little bit down there. I'm like, yeah, a little bit. They have to throw at targets and structure, and you're stripping and retrieving different flies at different speeds and learning how to fish those. And it's, strip sets and double hauls, and it's fun. It's pretty interactive. Keeps you busy all day, and you're always kind of on the hunt for something versus floating through a riffle and roll casting and watching your bobber and just hoping some fish bites it,
Yeah.
It's got a little bit more of that hunting element to it. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it is the warm water stuff up here too.
Yeah, dude, this is a PG version of what you guys do, and don't get it twisted. I tell people this: if I could fish for muskie or pike anywhere within 1,000 miles of me, that's what I would be doing too, Brian. But largemouth bass are the coolest fish we've got to fish for, so that's what we do.
Hey, man, if you're fishing whatever you're fishing from a predator standpoint in a river like the Pecos, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because it's the whole experience that you're kind of getting out of that deal, that the fish is almost secondary.
That deal is different. Here where we float 5 days a week, like the fishery is more the focus, and teaching people to fish, and we guarantee fish. Brian, I don't know if I told you that, but you don't catch fish with Finstincts, you don't pay. I've worked for a lot of guys, and I've been around. Like, I don't know any other outfitters that have adopted that policy in the fishing, and it's only ever happened to us one time. And if it happened once a week, we probably wouldn't have that policy. But we have a lot of faith in this fishery, and take a lot of pride in teaching people how to fish. And I mean, I'm not telling you there's days they don't catch two fish, but we don't have days where people don't catch fish. They learn to fly fish and they catch bass the same day every time,
Yeah.
Which is really cool. But the Pecos thing, it is a world-class adventure that's centered around fly fishing, but it's an adventure fly fishing trip. There's so much more to it than just the fishing. Sometimes you get down there and put your rod down, and you're like, I think I want to go see that cave up there. I just caught a 5-pound bass. I'm good for a few hours, And you go hike around and look for arrowheads and Pancho Villa's cannon and look for cave paintings.
So how do people find you, JD, outside of your Instagram? And why don't you just kind of roll through your contact information real quick, because you built up this beautiful, awesome stuff you do down in Texas, and I want to make sure people have the ability to get in touch with you if they want to come down and experience some of this.
Yeah. I hope so, man. I feel like I get too wordy sometimes, and what we do is so diverse. I hope people don't, get it twisted. We are a fly fishing outfitter. That's what we do most of the time, but there's all kinds of adventures we get into down here, and there's a lot to see, and it's definitely a place worth coming and seeing. As far as getting in touch with us, Finstincts.net is our website. Our Instagram is at Finstincts. The Facebook is the same name. But I would say that the Instagram, shooting us a message on there, is a great way to get in touch with us. Our email is fishingwithfinstincts@gmail.com. And that's all through our website there. There's a portal. They can, send a message and comes direct to the email. But definitely reach out to us, man. There's a lot of cool stuff to see down here. I tell them you won't ever get to shoot a wild hog from a drift boat while you're floating and fly fishing in Wyoming, but you can in Texas.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a joke, but it's the truth, man. Fly fishing mostly is our slogan.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of a little mischievous slogan. We like to, what were you doing when you got arrested, man? Well, fly fishing mostly.
Oh shit! So that mostly part, you wanna kind of close out the show real quick with just a little bit of the hunting side of stuff that you guys kind of do. Either you don't have to go too deep into it. We could save that for another show, but you might as well fill in that mostly as well for folks.
Yeah. I mean, dude, we could go on and on about the mostly, but it's like, all the adventures that the river has to offer are things that we do. We do a lot of duck hunting in the winter. We also have some lakes that we duck hunt on, but that is bread and butter for us from mid-December till the end of January while the fishing's slow. That's really our only slow time for the bass fishing here. So we do a lot of duck hunting, and then we do some horseback sheep hunting on that ranch in South Texas. Intermittently throughout the spring and the fall, we hunt the Barbary sheep, or audads they call them. And it's the fastest growing big game hunt in the world right now because it's kind of a poor man's sheep, they call it. They cost anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000, but it's a true, mountain sheep hunt type experience, spot and stock, putting in hard work and sometimes making long shots and hunting those animals in their environment is a real challenge that a lot of people are drawn to. So we do some of that, and then the mostly part too. We'll float and camp and fly fish all day, and then we'll bow fish at night, shoot carp and gar with bow and arrows, man. We'll run jug lines for catfish, and I'm the only fly fishing guide you'll see throwing a cast net at the end of the day, catching shad so we can run jug lines, right? And I mean, dude, I grew up like that, playing Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, and like I refuse to let go of some of those things and like buy into part of the purist culture. Like I'm not the Orvis poster boy. I have a lot of friends at Orvis, but you can hear a pin drop when I walk in that place. They're like, oh, damn, the rednecks are back again. And like, I told someone the other day, I said, making a living in the outdoors is always changing and doors are always opening. And what that looks like day to day is always different. For me, it's like, get on the plane, go kill that sheep, come back, row the boat, catch those fish, set up those wall tents. It's different stuff every day. And I'm sure throughout my life, I'll get into different things. But at the end of my life, my impact on the industry, when I'm an old man, I want people to say, that's the guy that got everybody fly fishing, man. And I think knocking some of that off its pedestal will just be collateral damage. That is not my intent, and it's not malicious. And I like the fly fishing purists too, but I want every redneck in America to have a fly fishing pole in their garage, and they can call it a pole if they want to, not a rod, and it's something that's kind of been held as an elite thing. And like, everybody's got fishing poles, but only these people fly fish. And I kind of like being like, no, dude, y'all aren't special. Look, I'm over here running jug lines and I can out fly fish all of you. And I'm going to teach all my redneck friends to do it too. and I just want it to be, in my mind, Brian, it's just another form of fishing, right?
Right.
Like if I'm fishing for a predatory fish, you're probably not ever going to find a bait caster rod in my hand. But I did catch my first swim bait fish this summer, and I liked it, dude. It was cool. I was throwing a 14-inch glide bait, big swim bait, and watched this fish come up and roll at it, and they T-bone it and hit it from the side because they think they have to knock it out first before they bite it. Like, pretty damn cool. And then I took my buddy that was build swim baits for a living and put a swim bait in my hand. I took him and had him fly fish all day. I just want it to be a more inclusive sport and for everybody to feel like they can do it. They think, oh, fly fishing's hard. You know how often I hear that from a 40-year-old guy? I've always wanted to try it. I'm like, dude, it's so easy. A cowboy can do it. Come here.
Yeah.
And like, I just don't overload them with shop talk. I'm like, I tell them whip it real hard and do it real slow. And whip it hard backwards and hard forwards. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's not hard. And I'm like, perfect, get in the boat. And we go catch some fish. And if they want to come back and learn more, I'll teach them more, But I love for people to feel like that they can do it when they leave after a day with me and not like it's a big book of secrets and you'll learn someday. I'm like, no, dude, you got it. You're great. You're a fisherman. Look, caught 6 bass. Here, buy yourself a rod. Let's do it again. And I get to see people, I get a lot of beginners into it, and I get to see them grow as anglers. They come back, and now they've been with me a year, and they've been 9 times, and we're having 3,000 level fly fishing classes,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the continuous improvement is always fun to see.
Yeah. And part of that, too, is like you kind of create your own market of people also, because I'm not just reaching in the cookie jar for the old avid fly fisherman that's booking yellow dog trips. I'm converting, conventional fishermen to fly fishing, and now they're clients for life,
Yep.
But it's fun to see people feel like they can, attain something that they've always thought was really hard or been painted up to be really complicated to them,
Yeah, that is the downfall with a lot of the fly fishing side of things. Now, there's certain aspects of fly fishing that are definitely hard, but to get into the sport and actually be successful and have a positive outcome is not difficult. It's
not at all.
The perception versus reality there is usually typically way off.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say that there's parts of all kinds of fishing or guitar playing or hitting golf balls that's really technical. And the more you want to dig in and learn, the more you realize you don't know. And the day I'm tired of learning about fly fishing, I won't be doing it anymore. I think that's why I'm so drawn to it too. I think it's something that I can spend a lifetime. I don't even want to say the word perfecting, because I don't think I'll ever perfect anything, but spend a lifetime becoming more proficient.
Yeah.
Becoming more proficient at, like, I think 65-year-old me will be able to outcast 32-year-old me with half the arm,
Mm-hmm.
100%. So it's fun, man. I'm always learning, and I'm trying to just keep paying it forward and sharing it with everybody I can. So making fly fishermen out of all the cowboys, dude. That's what we're doing down here in Texas. And if you're not sure about it, you're a fly fisherman, come down here and we'll make a cowboy out of you,
I'm afraid of that invite, man.
Oh yeah. We'll be hunting quail horseback and stomping rattlesnakes and fly fishing and doing all the stuff. Fly fishing mostly, dude.
Fly fishing mostly. Hey, I think I'm going to name that the name of the episode. So
I love it, dude. That's it. Yeah. 100%.
Well, JD, it's been a blast having you on the show, dude. I appreciate you making time for me. We could probably make another hour and a half of bullshit session out of this, but I think we'll have to save some for another time.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I hope you got some of what you wanted. This is actually the first podcast I've been on, Brian. I've been asked to be on several of them, and it just never has come to fruition. But I hope I didn't overload you with too much stuff, and people kind of get a picture of what we do down here. But fly fishing mostly. You got it, dude.
Fly fishing mostly, man. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Amazing Outdoors podcast. If you would like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment regarding this podcast, tell a friend helps at the end. Spread this podcast and beat the algorithm. I'm Brian Mays. I'm going to be out at Pheasant Fest this upcoming weekend. Hope to see some of you out there. Come check me out at the Wisconsin Sharp-Tailed Grouse Society booth. Until the next episode, tight lines, shoot straight, and get out and join your local conservation effort. I'm out of here.